Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are tuning in from today. And we want to thank you for joining this TechStrong learning experience with ngrok. My name is Jared, and I'd like to welcome you to our TechStrong learning program. This session is being recorded and will be available afterward on demand. We will be sending you a link to the recording after we conclude today's session. We do have a few handouts in the resource section on the left side of your screen, so feel free to check those out throughout the program at any time. Please send us your questions to the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen, and join us in the chat by telling us where you're tuning in from, sharing your experiences, your comments, your understanding on the matter. We do want to hear from you, and we want to engage with you. So any questions that we're not able to get to through today's session, please take note that we'll be following up with you shortly after the program. We want to make sure that everything does get answered today. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic. API gateways are more than just traffic managers. We're joined with Alice Wasco, Senior Software Engineer at ngrok, and Joel Hans, Senior Developer Educator at ngrok. Alice, Joe, we want to thank you for joining us here today. And Joel, I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to you while I turn my camera and microphone off. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. As Jared said, I'm Joel Hans. I do lots of DevRel related things here at ngrok. And basically, but it all comes down to like teaching engineers and developers, as you all are, like how to do better things with your API gateways. And that's what we're going to do a lot of today. And I'm very excited to dig into it. Alice?
Thanks, Joel. Yeah. Hi, I'm Alice. I work on some stuff here at ngrok. Lately, I've been working on our Kubernetes operator. I don't know what else to say. I'll turn it back over to you.
That's perfect. I think DevRel people like to say that we do a lot of things, but Alice is truly doing a lot of things right now. Operator stuff, just like even that alone is an enormous task, and Alice is doing amazing work there. But we are here to talk about API gateways and them being more than just traffic managers. And yeah, before I jump in, I would love to hear from folks about like whether they have heard of ngrok before, if they are using it already, and if you are, like in what capacity are you using it. I've got some other questions and polls down the line, but that would be a great place to start if anybody wants to hop into the chat and let us know kind of where they come from on that front. But to dig into this API gateway conversation, what do folks get wrong about API gateways, or what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about them? I think the title of this webinar, that that they are more than just traffic managers, assumes that people often think they are just traffic managers or fancy load balancers. People often think, well, I can just use whatever comes with my cloud provider. That could be AWS API gateway, that could be GCP's version, Azure's version, so on and so forth. A lot of people think that they're like a set it once and then it kind of just does its thing type of tool, and they often think that, like, since it's just routing traffic, whatever is the simplest version of doing that, like just a reverse proxy somewhere that's accessible to the public internet, doing some routing work, problem solved. And we are, we very strongly believe, I guess we come with the bias working for ngrok, but we very strongly believe that API gateways can do a whole lot more than just load balance traffic or route traffic to multiple upstream API services. We think it could be a policy engine. What do I mean by a policy engine? We mean that API gateways can be an enforcement point for really essential policies that your organization probably already uses. And if not, like, as you start using API gateways, you certainly will come across these policies like security, transforming requests, routing traffic, as I've mentioned a few times already. With an API gateway as a policy engine, you can wire up these behaviors and these actions without modifying your backend services. So for example, if you wanted to add geoblocking to an API, but you didn't have a policy engine, or an API gateway capable of operating as a policy engine, that means that you need to add a bunch of this business logic to your API service. And that is not something that I think anybody here is particularly interested in doing. You can make your API experience a lot more dynamic. That could be by manipulating headers, adding rate limits, doing different deployment strategies like rolling out canary deployments to see how a V2 of your service performs compared to the V1. And you can potentially smooth your path to going multi-cloud if you kind of make the right choices with your API gateway. And yeah, it's bonus points if it's also composable. And we'll talk about composability in a little bit with the architecture that ngrok has built, and then also some of the demoing that Alice is going to do. So ngrok's traffic engine is, we call this traffic policy, and it's a configuration language that lets you filter, match, manage, and orchestrate API traffic at your gateway. And I'll show an example of how this works on the next slide, but that means like attaching rules to phases of a request's lifecycle, filtering traffic, manipulating it based on the attributes of the requests, which allows you to kind of create some really powerful end results for your traffic and how people are accessing your services. Again, composability is a huge thing for us. And when we say composability in terms of what ngrok is capable of, we mean that each piece of traffic policy is modular, it's reusable, it's highly configurable, but also not in like an extremely verbose way. It's configurable while also being, simple to operate and easy to kind of get it to do what you need it to do. And it scales without adding complexity, which is a really important piece of, if you have an API gateway set up and you have, 5 different services running through it, and you need to add 5 more, like the complexity doesn't scale, like it doesn't explode. It doesn't, scale at an enormous pace. It's remains very manageable, and you can kind of keep on top of all the different routing things and the different kind of rules that you need to set up without creating a ton of burden on a DevOps or infrastructure or platform engineering team. And I meant to do this a moment ago, but I'm going to open up a poll here. Hopefully you all will see this slide in on the bottom left of your screen. And it's just like, are you already using an API gateway? We would love to hear kind of like where you are coming to this conversation from, and what is providing the most value to you. It could be, you're using some kind of policy centric thing already, or it could be that you just like how it lets you route traffic or load balance really easily. So I mentioned traffic policy a couple times here, and how ngrok does this. And I wanted to show an example of kind of what this looks like using a popular option right now. A lot of people, if you go on Hacker News with any frequency, you will see that people are, putting services online. They're accessible to the public internet. Maybe it's just a blog that they host, or they self-host, or a simple service that doesn't really get much traffic. And then all of a sudden it gets absolutely hammered by AI bots or search bots. And it's like almost like a DDoS attack, especially if you're self-hosting something and, like on a small VM somewhere or on a Raspberry Pi in your living room. And that's a real problem. And traffic policy has a great solution for that. So in this policy, we are saying that on every HTTP request, we want to run this policy rule. And we are using an expression to filter the requests that are coming in. So that means that if this rec.userAgent variable, if the value of that matches, a couple of these strings here, it could be ChatGPT user, GPT bot, or Claude in the user agent, we are going to take some action on that request. And in this case, if this expression evaluates true, we're going to run this action, the deny action, and give them a 404 status code. And that means that, generally you're kind of presenting to this AI bot that there's nothing for them at this URL. And hopefully that means that they recognize that and come back. But the great thing is that that no matter what happens, this is going to be blocking that traffic from reaching your endpoint or from reaching your service. And that's definitely peace of mind moving forward. This is just one example of a rule, and you can add multiple rules together and chain them together to take a lot more nuanced and sophisticated action on your traffic, which is what Alice is going to show in just a couple minutes as I finish running through all these slides. So if you're not familiar with ngrok at all, it's, when it comes to API gateways, again, we think of ourselves as the most composable API gateway. We're collapsing a ton of different networking and infrastructure components, all of which are extremely sophisticated and difficult to sort of learn about and then also wrangle in production. And yeah, we're taking all that, collapsing it into something as simple as one ngrok agent, one endpoint, and one traffic policy. And that is, from our perspective, that makes doing a lot of really interesting things on an API gateway a lot more accessible to a lot more people. ngrok's composability also lets you just grab what you need, tinker around, and build up the perfect API gateway for you. And there's a ton of extra benefits to that. But I think probably of this list, what is most exciting to me is the fact that ngrok works the same wherever you're running it. That could be multiple clouds, different environments, whether you are using it in VMs or Kubernetes. It works the same there. You can apply the same traffic policies no matter what, and you're going to get benefits and be able to take all the action you need in all those different environments. So how does this all come together with ngrok's API gateway? There's many ways to do this. As I've said, this is a very composable platform, so you can chain things together in lots of different ways. But what we see as the most common pattern, what we are recommending to prospects, and what we see people coming in and how they seem to be understanding the right way to put these primitives together, is that you have users coming in, sending in requests. You have what we call a cloud endpoint, which is an always-on endpoint associated with a URL like api.yourcompany.com. And you manage these on the ngrok dashboard or with our API. And this is where you can apply and centralize your traffic policy rules. These are things that you might want to ensure are applied equally across all of your API services, like authentication, geoblocking, or the ability to add and remove headers to be able to, maybe you need to add some logging, maybe you need to enrich the headers coming in so that your API services can take different action based on what's coming in. And there's a bunch of other things that you can explore in our documentation, and Alice will show a couple more of those as well. Traffic goes through the cloud endpoint, through those rules, and into the internal agent endpoint, which again is the is ngrok running in the CLI, maybe on a Kubernetes cluster, maybe as an SDK embedded directly in your app. And this is where you can add additional traffic policy rules. You can compose them on that are just for that API service. And this is perfect for if you have, let's say, one API service that requires rewrites or redirects. You don't want to apply that across everything. You want to make sure that that's only working on that specific API service. And then, of course, traffic moves to the API service itself, and then eventually kind of goes back from right to left, back toward the user, at which point you can also take additional action on the response side of the request lifecycle. And last piece I want to mention here is that I'm showing just a single internal agent endpoint here, but this could be any number of endpoints and API services, all accessible through your cloud endpoint, which handles all of the routing for everything. And I think on that, we are ready to move into the demo portion. And I'm not sure if any questions or anything came up, but yeah, maybe Alice, I'll just kind of let you take it from here.
Thanks, Joel. Doesn't look like we've got any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Sorry, it's always so hard for me to figure out the button on here for sharing a screen. Sorry, got to give it permission, apparently.
While you're working on that, I'll just wait to see when you get it up and running. But we've got some interesting stuff coming through the poll. Folks using Spring Cloud Gateway. I see a few people using that for routing, load balancing, circuit breaking. So yeah, load balancing seems like a pretty important piece of the puzzle here.
All right. Hopefully that's popped up for everyone now.
I do see that, yes.
Awesome. Let's get started then. So I wanted to go ahead and start by doing this in the ngrok dashboard. I did briefly mention I am working on our Kubernetes operator. So most of the stuff you can do with ngrok, there's lots of different ways to do it. I'm going to show it in the dashboard just because that's really easy to demo and follow along and read. But we have SDKs that you can, write your own totally custom logic in your language of choice. We've got an API, so you can make just direct requests, however you want to structure those. We've got our Kubernetes operator, we've got our CLI, and then of course you can do a lot of stuff from the dashboard as well. So we want to make some endpoints. So within my ngrok dashboard, I'm going to set up a domain. It's basically just a host name that I want to be able to handle with ngrok. So I'm going to do Alice. Let me make this screen a little bit bigger. I'm going to make a new domain. I'm going to call it Alice Webinar Demo. And then you can bring your own domains if you want to, register your DNS servers to point at ngrok. Otherwise, as you can see, it's suggesting a whole bunch of domains here from the ngrok IO. You can just quickly add on and just use those automatically. And that'll automatically use ngrok's TLS stuff for us as well. So you don't need to set up our own certs if we don't want to for quickly demoing things out. So this is going to give me an example of how I might use the ngrok CLI to start, an endpoint on this domain I just created. But we're not going to do that. We're going to set up our own endpoint really quickly in the endpoints dashboard. And so you can see I've already got a couple here from some other development work I'm doing. But we want to make a new cloud endpoint. And so a cloud endpoint is essentially like an endpoint where the total configuration for it lives in the cloud. You don't need to have any sort of service or anything running for this configuration, this endpoint to be online. And we're just going to pass in our domain we created earlier. And then we have a few options here. We can go public, internal, Kubernetes operator. So public's just going to allow anyone to access the endpoint. Internal, we'll talk a little bit more in a second, but it lets you lock things down so that only you can access them from traffic policies. And then Kubernetes operator is a little bit more on the advanced side, but you can configure things so that only certain endpoints and stuff with the operator can access this. All right, so we've got our new endpoint. It just got created. If we come over here, we can see it's created less than a minute ago. And this is what our default traffic policy looks like. So Joel did go over this, but just to kind of reiterate, high level, we've got these things called phases. So right now we have three main ones. There's on HTTP request, on HTTP response, and on TCP connect. And then within those, you just pass it a list of rules that you want to run. As you can see, we've got our one rule, default cloud endpoint policy. And then within those rules, you can specify a list of actions. So this one is going to try to forward to some internal endpoint that doesn't work. And then it's going to send to this page right here as well. So we're going to get rid of all that actually. And I'm going to go ahead and pop over to here where I've prepared some traffic policies to get started with. So first thing I want to do is show off kind of the GeoIP stuff that Joel mentioned. So if I apply this traffic policy here, we're just going to always send back a custom response. It's going to tell us what our connection's country and city is, as well as this thing client IP categories. So I'll explain more in a second. So we're going to go ahead and pop this in here, and then we'll hit save. And then if I go ahead and open up this, if we make this text a little bigger. You can see I am in Gresham right now, so that's why the city says Gresham. And you see there's nothing in the IP categories. So IP categories, if I come over to the ngrok docs and go to our IP intelligence section, there are tons of properties in here that you can use to look up stuff like the client IP, the server IP. And so the categories will let you know, let's jump to that section. You can do stuff like check, obviously the GeoIP stuff I mentioned as well, but somewhere within this page, yeah, here we go. There's a whole bunch of different categories. Like if this IP is on certain different types of block lists, you can check if it's like a Tor browser or Tor proxy, things like that, like VPNs as well. So obviously I'm just connecting directly. I'm not running any sort of proxy or anything like that. So the response I get back from my cloud endpoint doesn't have any special categories on it. You can do that to filter out things like people coming from proxies, people coming from IPs that are on block lists and things like that. So now that we've got our basic cloud endpoint up, we're just always sending back this 200 response. Let's go ahead and change that up a little bit. I want to start implementing some GeoIP blocking. So I'm going to go ahead and add a rule that's going to say if the connection is not Gresham, we're going to send a 403 request denied. And then following that, if we didn't block that request, we're going to route to this forward internal endpoint. So again, internal endpoints are essentially something that you set up that are only accessible by you from these forward internal traffic policy actions. So you can connect all of your services through ngrok while keeping them not exposed to the internet unless you put them behind the traffic policy. So in this case, I have this endpoint alice ngrok cli.internal. And what that's going to do is I have, let me show you the config for it really quick. Within my local machine, my ngrok config file, I've pulled it out here so you can't see my auth token, but I just have an endpoint here. It's really simple. We're just going to say this is the URL I want to host it on is the same as we put in our traffic policy. And any traffic it gets, we're just going to route to localhost on port 8080 because I have a instance of HTTP bin running there in my Docker setup. So I'm going to go ahead and copy our new traffic policy, and we will go ahead and get that updated. All right, so if I go ahead and come back here and refresh this page, you can see, oh, it's offline. I haven't started my ngrok internal endpoint yet. So we're going to go ngrok start demo. That's the name of my endpoint. So you can see that's started, and we should be able to get traffic going to that now. All right, so we've got our HTTP bin response. That's looking good. And then if I were to come back to my traffic policy, because I am in Gresham, we're going to go ahead and change that just to demo this and say, like, if we are in Gresham, we're going to block you. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if we come back over to our demo page, if we refresh that, we get denied. Feel free, anyone else who wants to try that out as I go along making changes to this endpoint. So that's just a little bit about how you can start implementing geoblocking. Something I want to call out right now as well is that almost all of these fields here support cell interpolation, and we have a ton of different, if we go over into our ngrok docs, it's the fastest way to get here, our macros section. So it supports cell interpolation, and there are, of course, a bunch of core macros that come with this as well. But we also have added a bunch of extended macros. So you can do stuff like base64 and JSON encoding. You can work with strings and maps. There's a whole bunch of different utility macros where you can do things like check IP ranges and encode and decode JSON and stuff. You can put regex as well in here, so you can get really fancy with these expressions if you want as well. Similar with the custom response, right? Like I could do some cell interpolation and regex here to, like my first example, send back some properties of the initial incoming connection. All right, so that's a pretty basic example of, geoblocking based on IPs. Well, let's start talking about like what happens when you want to like route all your different services? So I'm going to bring back that initial response I had where we're just telling you your IP stuff. And I'm going to put it behind this expression, path.starts with IP-info. So this is how you would set up like a prefix match. And if that does match, we're going to run this. You can have a list of expressions as well if you want to have multiple different match criteria, like request headers with the path, with query parameters as well. And the way it works is that every single expression in the list needs to evaluate to true for this following set of actions to run. And so another thing, we still have our deny request if our request is not coming from Gresham. And so theoretically, after any sort of policies we have up here for security authentication, everything below that will only be accessible if all of the above actions have succeeded. So we want to set up another route. We're still going to be routing to my internal endpoint, but we're going to put it behind a prefix now, HTTP bin. But since HTTP bin doesn't know a path for /HTTP bin, we want to rewrite that URL before we send the request off so we don't get a 404. We're also going to go ahead and just add a random header to showcase that as well. So this will just input our current city into this X client city header. So I'm going to copy that and come back over here and apply it. Cool. So if we come back over to where I've got my endpoint, if we refresh this page, oh, I haven't set up actually a path for the slash case. So that's always a good thing to do when you're writing traffic policies is add like a single, at the very bottom, like either a forward to a service that handles 404s if you have like some kind of dynamic content you want to display, or you could just use a custom response like this. And we could go ahead and just put something like that at the very bottom to return a 404 page. But because I don't, we're just getting this error back to say we just don't have a handler for the base path because I put it behind HTTP bin. And we still get routed. And since we have the HTTP bin getting removed, we are able to make requests to paths that HTTP bin understands. So if I do /git, we are removing the middle prefix HTTP bin, and we are getting the /git path from HTTP bin. And if we look at our headers, we can see we've added our user agent city or our client city header. Next, we've still got kind of the same traffic policy, but we want to go ahead and say like, what's going to happen right now if our upstream service goes down? So if I go ahead and within my Docker, I'm going to take the HTTP bin container, I'm going to pause it. If I were to go ahead and refresh this page, you get a hang. And eventually after a certain point, we're going to time out and we'll get an error page back. So we want to be able to have like dynamic responses and things like that when we fail to route a request or there's some kind of a problem like this. So I've gone ahead and just added this on error continue so that if we have any issues communicating with the upstream or it fails, we're just going to drop into the following rule. So this will just send back a let's change that to 503 service unavailable. So I'm going to go ahead and update this. And if I go ahead and refresh this page, you can see it's still trying to connect. Let me go ahead and stop waiting on that request because it's never going to succeed. If we make another request, did I save this? Okay. I did save this. I'm not sure why that's not working at the moment. What happens if I turn off this? Oh, it did just get routed before I turned it off. Let's go ahead and turn that endpoint back on and make a request. It's being very slow today. This was working last night when I demoed it myself. But yeah, if we do take that endpoint itself offline, we will get our service. Yeah, it looks like it's just being slow. It happens before I alt tab. All right. I think that was kind of all I really wanted to show right now, but I'll briefly go into some of our other actions for traffic policy. So you can see right here, we've got like all sorts of stuff you can do within the traffic policy. You can obviously forward and manipulate requests, but we've also got auth, OIDC, rate limiting, that kind of thing. You can use this TLS termination action as well to either terminate TLS yourself if you don't want to use your own certificates, or if you don't want to, or don't use the ngrok certificates. You can do things like specify the min and the max TLS version, enforce MTLS, and all sorts of other things as well. And within my ngrok dashboard back over here, I can go ahead and come over to this traffic inspector. And this will show us a little bit about what's going on with the with our endpoints. So you can see this is the endpoint that I've been making requests to over the course of this. And we've got, here are our 503s we were getting. And if you see this little thing right here, those are like those ngrok error pages that you get. So you can kind of filter those based on whether or not any of the traffic policy actions failed or anything like that. You can see someone just tried to make a request and got blocked. Yeah, and then another thing is that because we have like a dual layer system, if we come back over to our endpoints, this is our cloud endpoint, and you see like down here, we're routing to this internal endpoint, but like a ton of this traffic policy config lives here. So if I wanted it to be a little bit more accurate, what I really should be doing is within my CLI configuration, I just have this basic endpoint. You can also down here put like traffic policy, and then you can put your own traffic policy as well that will run on the agent side. So if I wanted to be a little bit better about my on error responses, I could have sent this in the one that's a little bit closer to the client side. So if it has any problems reaching the upstream, it could have sent that back instead of waiting on trying to get a response first before it errored. So yeah, you can totally mix and match. You can do things like put a rate limit on the endpoint right here, and that will let you like rate limit per upstream service you're trying to reach. We've just finished up some work on endpoint pooling. So like, let's say I've got, this service HTTP bin or whatever, and I'm running it on a lot of different machines. I don't want to have to like set up some really complex traffic policy to like add every single one of, unique internal URLs for all of those different things. So something we just released is that you have the ability to pool them. So it's just like a flag in the config within the docs. It's just like pooling enabled. And then you can use the same URL across multiple different endpoints, and it'll balance between them. And currently we're working on a bunch of cool stuff that allow you to more accurately select which endpoint within a pool you would like to send requests to. So you can do things like balance based around availability and stuff. A lot of that's still in the works, but it's coming out soon. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the demo there and see if we have any final questions or anything like that.
Thanks, Alice. No questions at the moment, but I am going to send out this poll about what features or actions folks would like to see from us, see us add into traffic policy. Alice showed a couple of the options in terms of geoblocking and adding headers, and then of course routing traffic to different services upstream. But there's a whole bunch of other actions as well. And we are, we're planning on adding more. There's more like in our pipeline, but we are of course, eager for feedback from people about like, oh, I would be able to use ngrok as my API gateway if you had X or Y. That's always fantastic incentive for our team to go and start building that stuff. In terms of one other thing that I was going to show, let's see, let me share my screen here. And if I will not be allowed to do that because I didn't set this up beforehand. But we have some, in addition to the individual actions, as Alice showed in our documentation, we have a like example repository that we are constantly trying to build out with additional more like use case centric chains of traffic policy expressions and actions. And if you are wondering like, can I do this weird thing with ngrok and traffic policy, that's a great place to go and check out whether or not one of us has already built that and tried it out and validated it for you. And if you are, start using traffic policy and build something out that we hadn't thought of, Our documentation is an open source repository on GitHub, and we do welcome PRs from the community. Anybody who is using traffic policy and thinks, yeah, maybe other people would get some value from something I've built, we love sharing that with everyone else. So let's see here. Anything coming in terms of new traffic policy features or actions? Nothing yet, but yeah, I think if there's not questions, or if anybody, I guess I was also going to open it up if anybody wants to see me and Alice implement something in particular. We could potentially do that depending on the complexity and whether or not it requires a bunch of external services. I do see one response to the of like what we could add, which is security rules. And I think we've got, depending on the context of the question or of that request, I think we have a couple of pretty compelling options there that we probably can't go through the whole like setup of JOT validation or something, or MTLS, but we certainly have those available. And both of those, JOT validation is very flexible because it works with, we have guides that we've written for using that with Auth0, but it also works with many different IDPs, and you can configure the JOT validation traffic policy action to connect to different issuers, and depending on exactly how like kind of where you're coming with an IDP and how you want to handle all of that. It's very flexible in that way that we're not locking you into a certain JOT provider. If you've got something, we will most likely work with it. The chat is quite quiet, so I think maybe at this point we can just wrap things up. And as Jared said initially, if there's a question that you have, maybe something that you think of only after we sign off here, or you have a little bit of time to look at the docs, feel free to let us all know, and we will be happy to follow up and get you the information you're looking for.
All right. I want to thank you both for taking the time for your presentation today. But before we do close out, I do want to remind everyone there is a survey in your resource section. Your input is invaluable to us. Your feedback goes a long way here, so please make sure that you fill that out. And any final thoughts that you've got, you can put that in there as well. Once again, this program was recorded and will be available to you afterwards. We'll send in a link to your inbox shortly after we conclude today's session. Excuse me, with a link to view it. Once again, I'd like to thank Alice and Joel for taking the time to join us. It's been a pleasure having you. If you guys don't have any final thoughts, we'll go ahead and close out. And I want to thank you all for this TechStrong learning experience.
Thanks, everybody.